Fireball whiskey is now being recalled in some parts of Europe because it contains an ingredient found in antifreeze.
On the surface, this story looks like a tale of extravagant taste, rare bottles, and a multi-million-dollar industry fueled by connoisseurs and collectors. Whiskey, the amber liquid aged in oak barrels, steeped in tradition and heritage, is often associated with sophistication, craftsmanship, and patience. But the story of the $863 million whiskey transaction is not, in the end, about whiskey at all. Not really. It's about wealth, power, perception, and the strange ways money flows in today's world. And when you peel back the layers, what you see is a story that speaks far more about human behavior than about a single bottle of spirits. It all started with the notion of scarcity. In the luxury world, scarcity drives desire. Whether it's vintage wines, rare sneakers, or limited edition watches, the rarer an item is, the more valuable it becomes, often far beyond its practical utility. Whiskey, particularly aged Scotch or single cask releases, fits perfectly into this ecosystem. A bottle that might have cost a few $100s when first released can, decades later, sell for tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands, purely because the supply is finite and the story behind it compelling. Now imagine an entire collection of such bottles, curated, preserved, and meticulously catalogued. This is where our story begins. A private collector, someone with immense wealth and a taste for exclusivity, amassed a portfolio of rare whiskies worth hundreds of millions. But this wasn't just a hobby or an indulgence. It was a deliberate financial strategy, a form of alternative investment disguised as connoisseurship. Each bottle represented not just a liquid product, but a story, a provenance, and a potential payday. And in the end, that portfolio reached a staggering valuation of $863 million. But here's where things get fascinating. While the media framed it as a story about whiskey, the rarest, most expensive bottles ever sold, insiders knew that the real game was never the drink itself. Whiskey, in this context, was merely a vehicle. The actual story was about wealth preservation, status signaling, and asset diversification. In a world where traditional markets fluctuate, real estate can be illiquid, and equities are volatile, luxury collectibles offer a unique refuge. They are tangible, portable, and, most importantly, culturally resonant. A rare bottle of 60-year-old Scotch is not just a drink, it is a claim to sophistication, taste, and insider access. And in the world of the ultra-wealthy, perception is everything. Think about this for a second. Do $863 million. That's not pocket change. That's the sort of money that could buy entire islands, fund high-tech startups, or influence global markets. Yet in this case, it was tied to barrels of fermented grains, meticulously aged and sold in glass bottles. At first glance, it sounds absurd, almost frivolous. But it's precisely this absurdity that makes the story so captivating. It's a stark illustration of how value is socially constructed and how perception, more than utility, drives human behavior at the highest levels of wealth. Now let's slow down and really understand the mechanics of this story. Each bottle in the portfolio had been chosen not purely for taste, but for rarity, provenance, and marketability. Collectors pay premiums not just for a label or a distillery, but for stories: who bottled it, when it was distilled, and under what circumstances. This is why certain whiskies become legend. A 1926 Macallan, for example, might sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars at auction, not because it tastes better than I-50 bottle, but because of its scarcity, age, and the mythos built around it over decades. What's even more interesting is how this market functions. Unlike stocks or bonds, rare whiskies are not widely traded daily. Prices are set by auctions, private sales, and collector networks. This creates an environment where hype, perception, and competition can dramatically inflate values. And that's exactly what happened with the $863 million portfolio. Each transaction fed into the narrative that these bottles were more than mere liquor, they were investment-grade assets. They became symbols of financial acumen, taste, and cultural literacy, all rolled into one amber liquid. And here's where the twist comes in. While the headlines shouted, 863 million whiskey collections sold, the people who really cared understood the subtext. This was about money moving invisibly through alternative assets, about wealth being stored in tangible objects with social cachet. The whiskey itself was secondary. It was a tool for showing power. influence, and sophistication. You could swap the bottles for rare watches, vintage cars, or fine art. The principles would remain the same. The market didn't care about taste. It cared about scarcity, liquidity, and prestige. Pause for a moment and consider this. Have you ever seen a story where something seemingly ordinary is valued so extraordinarily? That's precisely what makes this case a window into human behavior at scale. The bottles could be opened, poured, and enjoyed, yet almost no one did. They were assets first, beverages second. The act of collecting and displaying became more important than consumption. It's a subtle but critical distinction. Luxury is about perception as much as reality. And this is why the story captures the imagination. The public sees bottles of whiskey with astronomical price tags and assumes it's about indulgence. They picture wealthy individuals savoring rare spirits in candlelit rooms. But the reality is far more calculated. The portfolio functions like a hedge fund, meticulously curated, managed for value appreciation, and strategically sold to maximize return. The whiskey is merely the vehicle. The true story is about strategy, timing, and financial maneuvering. Let's break down some of the key elements that made this portfolio worth $863 million. Scarcity and provenance: bottles with limited production runs, historic significance, or unique cask finishes commanded massive premiums. Collectors competed not just for the drink, but for ownership of a piece of history. Market timing: like any investment, timing matters. The value of rare whiskeys surged in the past decade, fueled by global wealth growth, auction hype, and emerging markets eager to participate in Western luxury culture. Cultural significance: owning rare whiskey signals taste, sophistication, and insider status. It's not just a beverage, it's a statement. Liquidity via auctions: unlike most collectibles, rare whiskeys have a transparent market through specialized auctions. High net worth individuals can buy and sell, knowing the approximate value, which creates a sense of security around what is otherwise a luxury gamble. Storytelling: every bottle came with a narrative: who distilled it, when, and why it matters. This narrative transforms commodities into cultural artifacts, which can command prices far exceeding the intrinsic value of the liquid inside. Now, let's make it even more interesting. While the portfolio was valued at $863 million, not every transaction involved literal cash changing hands. Some deals were structured creatively: equity swaps, leveraged purchases, or trade-ins with other luxury assets. This is another reason why the story is never about whiskey. The whiskey acts as a proxy for wealth that can be shifted, leveraged, and displayed in ways traditional currencies cannot. It's a perfect example of financial engineering disguised as connoisseurship. And here's a question for you. Why would someone spend millions on a bottle they might never drink? The answer lies in the psychology of luxury and investment. Scarcity creates desire. Visibility creates status, and participation in an exclusive market creates identity. Owning a bottle from the portfolio is like owning a small piece of cultural capital, an asset whose value grows as long as the perception of scarcity and prestige persists. The broader lesson here is that humans assign value not just to tangible goods, but to perceived social power. This $863 million whiskey story is really about social signaling as much as it is about financial strategy. It's a case study in how wealth, status, and perception intersect in markets where conventional rules of supply and demand are only part of the equation. And here's the final thought I want you to take away. The $863 million whiskey story is a mirror. It reflects not just the extraordinary lengths people will go to preserve wealth, but the extraordinary lengths humans go to ascribe meaning to objects. Whiskey, in this context, is a metaphor for all luxury, all art, and all status symbols. It's never just about the object itself. It's about what it represents, how it's perceived, and how it moves through networks of influence and power. So the next time you hear about an ultra-expensive collectible, a rare bottle of whiskey, or a multi-million dollar auction, remember this: the story is never just about what's being sold. It's about perception, power, and the subtle interplay between wealth and social identity. The liquid inside the bottle is incidental. What really matters is the narrative, the prestige, and the $863 million story that has little to do with whiskey and everything to do with human ambition, desire, and the way we assign value in a complex world. And if there's one lesson you remember from this story, It's this true value is as much about psychology as it is about material goods. The whiskey portfolio is worth hundreds of millions not because of taste, but because it represents a carefully curated intersection of scarcity, status, and strategy. It's an investment in perception as much as it is in liquid. And in a world where perception often shapes reality, that's a story worth understanding, far beyond the amber glow of a single bottle.